In a world that celebrates noise, hustle, and the big, bold moments, it's easy to overlook the power of stillness. But what if the greatest events in our lives, the ones that truly change us, happen not in the spotlight, but in our quietest, most reflective hours? Today, we're diving into why those silent, unseen moments hold the most meaning, and how embracing stillness can transform your perspective, your decisions, and ultimately, your life. Welcome back to my channel, where we explore the deeper side of success and personal growth. Let's get started. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the scent of it still lingered: wet stone, bruised earth, and the faintest trace of jasmine from the garden below. Lila sat curled on the narrow windowsill of her apartment, legs tucked beneath her, a threadbare blanket around her shoulders. Outside, the world was washed clean and quiet, the city softened by the blue-gray veil of early dawn. She hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 days. Her phone, face down on the floor, had buzzed itself into silence long ago. There was no drama in this withdrawal, no slammed doors or tearful declarations. Just a subtle weight that had pressed her deeper into herself, asking for stillness. Not escaped at it was in this hush that the thought arrived, not with a bang, but like a tide rolling in unnoticed, until her feet were wet and she realized the water had always been rising. That it's not about fixing everything. The idea settled in her, uninvited and yet completely familiar. It's about stopping the need to. She exhaled slowly, the breath slipping through her lips like an old regret. So much of her life had been about effort, grasping, proving, achieving. The trophies, the degrees, the carefully worded apologies. She had believed that healing was a checklist, that peace was a prize at the end of endurance. But here, in the cradle of silence, it occurred to her, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it never was. The sky blushed with the first hint of gold. Light filtered through the fog like something shy, not yet ready to be seen. Lila watched it quietly, her palms open in her lap, empty, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was falling behind. She just was. And it was enough. He didn't knock. He never did. Jonah stepped into the room like a shadow slipping through dusk. Ilara didn't turn to look. She was seated on the floor, back against the cold radiator, hands resting idly in her lap. Her cheeks were dry now, but the rim of redness around her eyes betrayed the earlier storm. The room was hushed. No music, no hum of the old heater, no outside noise sneaking through the drafty windows. Just the faint creak of wood as Jonah sat beside her, not too close, not too far. He said nothing. Not even her name. Ilara had prepared for words. She'd rehearsed her deflections and smiled through worse. But now, with him there, saying nothing at all, everything she'd built inside her began to loosen. She didn't speak either. Couldn't. Instead, her gaze flicked to the edge of his sleeve, the way his hand rested palm up beside her on the floor. He wasn't offering it. He wasn't asking anything. It was just there. That quiet gesture unraveled something deeper than any question could. She thought of all the people who had tried to help her fix what they didn't understand. But Jonah didn't try to solve her. He just sat in the silence with her, as if saying, "I see you. You don't have to speak to be heard." A minute passed. Then 5. The weight in her chest eased, not lifted, not gone, but no longer suffocating. Her fingers twitched, and after a pause, she let her hand drift until it touched the side of his. Their fingers didn't entwine. They just touched, barely, and held there, still and steady, and in that silence, something passed between them. Not forgiveness. Not comfort. Something older, quieter, and more honest than either of those. Presence. Witness. A vow made without breath or sound. No one noticed when she stopped bringing her sketchbook to the cafe. For 3 years, May had claimed the same corner table beneath the crooked painting of a lighthouse, the one place in the city where the noise seemed to fade just enough for her to think. She used to arrive early, open her book slowly, and sketch in long, deliberate strokes, faces of strangers, fragments of dreams, buildings she wished she'd lived in, but not today. Today, May came with empty hands. She still ordered the same coffee, still gave the same nod to the barista who spelled her name wrong with unwavering confidence. But when she sat down, she only stared at the cup as steam curled upward, vanishing before it reached her face. There had been no dramatic moment. No shattering truth. Just something quiet that had built, day by day, in the stillness between other people's noise. It began weeks ago, when she found herself pausing with pencil in hand, not because she couldn't draw, but because she no longer wanted to. The sketchbook had become a mirror she didn't need anymore. What she needed was space to stop performing for herself. So she left it home. And nobody noticed, not her sister, who still thought of May as the creative one. Not her ex, who had once told her she only loved the world through her art. Not even the cafe regulars, who cast the same distracted glances her way as always. But something had shifted. When May walked home that evening, the streets looked unchanged. People bustled past her in their own narrow universes. She didn't mind. The quiet inside her was fuller now, not empty. Not loss. Just cleared. Later that night, without a ceremony, she placed the sketchbook in a box, slid it onto a high shelf, and didn't label it. No one would ever point to this day as a turning point. But May would remember it, not for what she stopped doing, but for what she no longer needed to prove. The hallway was dim, lit only by the amber glow of a single wall sconce. Rows of closed doors stretched out in both directions like a dream. On the 5th floor of St. Mercy's Hospice, everything was quiet, eerily so, as if the building had agreed to hold its breath. Ava stood outside room 514, her fingers pressed against the cool brass handle. She had stood there for 7 minutes, maybe more, unmoving. Not out of fear, exactly, but because something inside her had gone very still. Not numb, just suspended. Inside, her father lay dying. That was the truth of it, as plain and brutal as the unspoken diagnosis she hadn't said aloud. Weeks ago, she would have barged in, tried to save something, fix something. She would have brought a list of questions, a voice too loud, a desperation dressed as strength, but not now. Now, something had shifted. It didn't feel like giving up. It felt like understanding, forgiveness finally unclenching its fists, grief no longer needing a witness. She let the silence in the hall wrap around her, let it press against her chest until she could finally hear her own breath. He had made mistakes. Big ones. There had been shouting, and silence, and years lost to the in-between. But the stillness tonight held none of that. There was no argument left to win. No closure to wring from words. Only this, her hand on the door, and the knowledge that walking in didn't mean fixing, didn't mean forgetting. It just meant being there. And maybe that was the storm, not the pain, not the confrontation, but the quiet decision to sit beside a man she had spent a lifetime running from, and let herself be human with him, not in spite of the damage, but because of it. She pushed the door open softly. The room smelled of antiseptic and old linens. Her father stirred, barely. His eyes fluttered open for a second. He saw her. Didn't speak, neither did she. She pulled the chair closer to his bed and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. The storm passed not with thunder, but with breath. With stillness, with staying. The apartment was small, barely furnished, and quiet enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator 3 rooms away. Nico sat on the edge of the bathtub, still dressed from work, his coat half off, clinging to one sleeve like a thought unfinished. He hadn't turned the lights on when he came home. The city outside blinked in half-formed reflections across the tiles. A street lamp flickered, scattering broken gold over the chipped linoleum floor. He stared at his hands, dry, cracked at the knuckles, his nails short and uneven. Nothing special. Nothing changed, and yet, everything had. No one would know what had happened that morning. There was no audience when he'd stood on the bridge, the icy rail biting into his palms, watching the water churn dark and slow below. There was no witness to the moment he leaned forward, just enough to feel the pull of it. Or the moment, smaller still, when he stepped back. No music swelled. No strangers ran up to stop him. No sudden revelation struck like lightning. Just a thought. Quiet. Fragile, asterisk you don't have to disappear to start over, asterisk it had landed softly in him, as if it had always been waiting there, beneath the ache and the static. He had walked away. Not triumphant. Not cured. But alive. And for the first time in months, that was enough. Now, sitting in the half-dark bathroom, he let the weight of the day fall from his shoulders in silence. No one had called. No one would ask what changed. He wouldn't tell them even if they did, but it was a miracle, small, quiet, private. He stood slowly, turned on the faucet, and began to wash his hands. The water ran pink at first, then clear. He dried them on a clean towel, then he opened the window. Just a little, and let the night air in.